Fort Bridger Trading Post, Wyoming Territory, September 1868. Stone Walker had traveled 300 miles through hostile territory with a string of mustangs to trade, expecting nothing more than the usual exchange of horses for supplies and ammunition. But when the grimy trader yanked the burlap sack from the captive woman's head and revealed a face that haunted his dreams for 7 years, the Comanche warrior dropped to his knees in the Wyoming dust, his war cry turning into a broken whisper of a name he thought he would never speak again: Morning Star. The September morning air carried the scent of wood smoke and horse sweat as Stone Walker guided his string of wild mustangs through the gates of Fort Bridger. The trading post squatted like a brown spider in the valley, its wooden walls weathered, grey by countless frontier winters and blazing summers. This was neutral ground, where Comanche, Cheyenne, Shoshone, and white trappers could trade without the immediate threat of violence that plagued the rest of the Wyoming Territory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Stone Walker was a man who commanded attention without seeking it. At 32, he stood 6 feet tall, with the lean, muscular build of a warrior who had spent his life on horseback. His black hair hung in 2 long braids decorated with eagle feathers earned in battle, and 3 parallel scars across his left cheek told the story of a grizzly bear encounter that had nearly cost him his life. But it was his eyes that marked him as different from other warriors, dark brown, almost black, but holding a depth of sadness that spoke of losses too great to bear. The mustangs he led were magnificent animals, 15 of them in various colors, from pure black to spotted paint, their coats gleaming with health and their spirits still wild despite the rawhide halters that held them. Stone Walker had spent the summer months capturing and gentling them, knowing that the white traders valued good horseflesh above almost anything else. He needed ammunition for the coming winter hunts, steel for arrowheads, and if the spirits were generous, perhaps some of the white man's medicine for his aging grandmother. Fort Bridger bustled with activity this morning. Wagon trains bound for California rested here before attempting the treacherous mountain passes. Their canvas tops stretched tight against the approaching autumn weather. Trappers brought beaver pelts and buffalo hides down from the high country, while traders from as far east as St. Louis displayed goods that seemed miraculous to those who lived beyond civilization's reach. The fort's commander, Colonel James Morrison, maintained an uneasy peace between the various factions that gathered here. The man understood that trade was more valuable than warfare in this remote corner of the territory, and he had built Fort Bridger's reputation as a place where business could be conducted without bloodshed. But the peace was always fragile, maintained by careful diplomacy, and the knowledge that outside these walls, the frontier war continued with brutal intensity. Stone Walker had been coming to Fort Bridger for 5 years, ever since he had established himself as one of the premier horse traders in the region. His reputation for honesty and the quality of his animals had earned him the respect of even the most prejudiced white traders. But today felt different. There was a tension in the air, a sense that something significant was about to happen. He guided his horses to the trading corral and began the process of securing them for display. Each animal was valuable, representing weeks of dangerous work in the wild horse territories to the south. The big black stallion at the head of the string was particularly magnificent, a horse that would command top dollar from any buyer with sense enough to recognize its worth. As Stone Walker worked with his horses, he became aware of a crowd gathering near the main trading post. Voices were raised in the harsh bargaining tone that meant serious business was taking place. Such gatherings usually involved major trades, perhaps a wagon train selling supplies before heading west, or trappers disposing of a season's worth of pelts. But there was something different about this crowd. Stone Walker had developed a keen sense for reading the moods of mixed groups like this, and what he sensed now was not the usual excitement of profitable trading. There was an ugliness in the air, a predatory energy that made his hand drift, unconsciously, to the knife at his belt. Securing his horses with practiced efficiency, Stone Walker made his way toward the crowd. He moved with the fluid grace of a man equally comfortable on foot or horseback, his moccasins making no sound on the hard, packed earth of the trading post's main area. Other traders nodded respectfully as he passed. His reputation preceded him, and even those who harbored prejudices against his people recognized his value as an honest dealer. The crowd was gathered around a makeshift platform that had been erected near the main trading post building. Stone Walker had seen such platforms before, usually used for auctioning off wagon loads of goods or displaying particularly valuable trade items, but as he drew closer, he realized this was something far more sinister. 3 figures stood on the platform, and Stone Walker's blood ran cold as he understood what he was witnessing. This was a slave auction, one of the most despicable practices of the white world that occasionally infected even these neutral trading grounds. 2 men flanked a third figure whose head was completely covered by a coarse burlap sack tied tightly at the neck with rough rope. The auctioneer was a greasy, unshaven man named Silas Crenshaw, a trader of dubious reputation who dealt in whatever goods would turn a profit, legal or otherwise. His voice carried across the crowd with the practiced boom of a man accustomed to commanding attention through sheer volume. "Now then, gentlemen," Crenshaw was saying, his tobacco-stained teeth visible in a predatory grin, "what we have here is a fine specimen. Young woman, maybe 25 years of age, healthy stock, good for work or other purposes." The man's leer made several onlookers shift uncomfortably, but not uncomfortably enough to walk away. Stone Walker felt his jaw clench with disgust. He had seen enough of the white man's slavery during his years of trading to know the evil it represented. His own people had their captives, true, but they were usually adopted into the tribe or ransomed back to their families. This cold-blooded buying and selling of human flesh was an abomination that made his stomach turn, but something kept him from turning away. There was something familiar about the captive's posture, the way she held herself even in her desperate circumstances. Despite the sack over her head and the rope binding her hands, she stood straight and proud, radiating a dignity that even her captors couldn't completely break. The woman's stance reminded him of someone he had once known, someone who had carried herself with that same regal bearing, that same unbreakable spirit, but that was impossible. The woman he was thinking of was dead, had been dead for 7 years. He had mourned her passing with a grief that had nearly destroyed him. "The bidding starts at $50, Crenshaw announced. "Do I hear 50? Several hands went up immediately. Stone Walker recognized some of the bidders, rough men who ran trading posts in remote areas where questions weren't asked and women were scarce. The sight of their eager faces made his hands clench into fists. The bidding climbed quickly. $60, $70, $80. These were substantial sums for a frontier auction, indicating that the woman was considered particularly valuable for reasons Stone Walker didn't want to contemplate. He found himself studying her more intently, that nagging sense of familiarity, growing stronger. There was something about the way she held her shoulders, the proud angle of her head, despite her bondage. Even with the sack covering her features, there was a grace to her movements that spoke of noble birth, of a woman accustomed to respect rather than degradation. At $90, the bidding slowed. Only 2 men remained active, a brutish trapper named McGillicuddy, who was known for his cruel treatment of anyone under his power, and a stranger Stone Walker didn't recognize, a well-dressed man who looked like he might represent interests. From back east, Stone Walker felt a cold rage building in his chest as he watched these vultures circling their prey. The thought of this woman, whoever she was, falling into the hands of men like McGillicuddy made his blood burn. There was something about her that called to him, something that demanded protection, even though he didn't understand why. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us now. Back to the story. "Going once at 90, Crenshaw called out. "Going twice, $100, came a voice from the crowd. Stone Walker looked around in surprise to see who had made the bid, then realized with shock that the voice had been his own. He hadn't even been aware of raising his hand or opening his mouth. Something deep inside him had responded to an instinct he couldn't explain, a compulsion stronger than rational thought. Crenshaw's eyes lit up with greedy excitement. 100. From the Comanche. Do I hear 110? Both McGillicuddy and the stranger hesitated. $100 was more than many men saw in a year on the frontier. It represented months of dangerous work, the value of several prime horses. McGillicuddy shook his head and stepped back, scowling. The stranger studied Stone Walker for a long moment, seeming to weigh the wisdom of bidding against a man whose reputation for deadly skill was well known, then also withdrew from the bidding. "Sold to Stone Walker for $100. Crenshaw declared, "Sir, if you'll step forward to complete the transaction." Stone Walker moved through the crowd as if in a dream. $100 was a fortune, more than he could really afford, representing months of dangerous work capturing and training horses. But something had compelled him to bid, some instinct, stronger than rational thought. Every warrior's sense he possessed was screaming that this moment was significant beyond his understanding. The crowd parted before him, some with respect, others with curiosity about what the enigmatic Comanche horse trader intended to do with his expensive purchase. Stone Walker was known as a man who kept to himself, who conducted his business with efficiency and fairness, but rarely engaged in the social aspects of trading post-life. As he approached the platform, Crenshaw was preparing for the final verification of the sale. This was standard procedure in such transactions. The buyer had a right to inspect his purchase before the money changed hands. The practice made Stone Walker's stomach turn, but he needed to see the woman's face, needed to understand why every instinct he possessed had driven him to this moment. "Let's have a look at your new acquisition," Crenshaw said, with a leer that made Stone Walker want to plant a tomahawk in the man's skull. The trader reached for the rope at the woman's neck, his grimy fingers working at the knot that held the burlap sack in place. Stone Walker watched, still not understanding why his heart was pounding so hard, or why every nerve in his body was taut with anticipation. The woman stood perfectly still during this final humiliation, her dignity intact, despite her circumstances. There was something almost ceremonial about her stillness, as if she were preparing herself for whatever fate awaited her with the stoic acceptance of a warrior facing death. The sack came away with a quick motion, and a cascade of long, dark hair tumbled free, catching the morning sunlight like polished obsidian. The woman raised her head slowly, blinking in the sudden brightness, and Stone Walker felt the world tilt beneath his feet. High cheekbones that could have been carved by the spirits themselves. Almond-shaped eyes the color of summer sky, so unusual among her people that they had been considered a sign of special favor from the gods. Skin like burnished copper, marked by the delicate tattoos that identified her as Lakota nobility. Features that had haunted his dreams for 7 years. A face he had believed he would never see again in this world or the next. "Morning Star," he whispered, the name torn from his lips like a prayer. The woman's eyes, which had been distant and resigned, suddenly focused on his face with an intensity that made the air between them crackle like lightning. Recognition dawned in those blue depths, followed by shock, hope, and a dozen other emotions too complex to name. "Stone Walker?" she whispered, her voice hoarse from captivity, but unmistakably the same voice that had once spoken words of love in the secret places of their youth. Stone Walker's knees buckled, and he found himself kneeling in the dust of the trading post, staring up at the woman he had loved and lost 7 years ago. The woman whose death he had mourned with a grief that had nearly destroyed him. The woman whose memory had driven him to this life of solitary trading, moving constantly from place to place to escape the ghosts that followed him. Morning Star, daughter of Chief Red Cloud, promised wife of his youth, was alive. The crowd around them murmured with confusion and curiosity. This was clearly not the usual reaction of a buyer to his purchase. Stone Walker could hear their whispers but couldn't process their words. His entire world had narrowed to the face before him, to the impossible reality that the woman he had mourned was standing on a slave trader's platform, bound with rope and sold like a horse or a bag of grain. Slowly, as if moving through thick water, Stone Walker struggled to his feet. His hands shook as he reached into his pouch for the gold and silver coins that would complete this obscene transaction. Whatever had happened to bring Morning Star to this place, whatever cruel fate had delivered her into the hands of slavers, he would pay whatever price necessary to free her from this nightmare. The coins felt heavy in his hands as he counted them out. Spanish silver, American gold eagles, even some of the new paper money that the white government was trying to make. People accept. Each coin represented hours of dangerous work, but he would have paid 10 times as much without hesitation. Crenshaw accepted the payment with greedy satisfaction, already counting the coins before they were fully in his hands. "Pleasure doing business with you, Stone Walker. She's all yours now, to do with as you please." The casual cruelty of the man's words made Stone Walker's hand drift toward his knife, but Morning Star caught his eye and gave an almost imperceptible shake of her head. She was right. Violence here would solve nothing and might endanger them both. There would be time later to settle accounts with men like Crenshaw. As Stone Walker helped Morning Star down from the platform, their hands touching for the first time in 7 years, he could feel the curious stares of the crowd and hear their whispered speculations. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was the woman beside him, alive and real despite all evidence to the contrary. "We need to get away from here," Morning Star said quietly, her voice still carrying the musical accent of her people despite the roughness of recent hardship. Stone Walker nodded, guiding her toward where his horses were secured. They moved through the crowd slowly, Stone Walker's reputation ensuring that people gave them space, but he could feel eyes following them and knew that their story would be told and retold throughout the trading post before nightfall. As they reached his horses, Stone Walker quickly untied his traveling pack and pulled out a blanket, wrapping it around Morning Star's shoulders to cover the torn and dirty dress that spoke of her recent ordeal. She accepted the gesture gratefully, pulling the blanket close not just for warmth, but for the protection it offered from curious stares. "Can you ride?" Stone Walker asked, his voice gentle but urgent. They needed to put distance between themselves and Fort Bridger before too many questions were asked or too much attention was attracted. Morning Star looked at the horses with an expression that might have been longing. "It has been a long time. But yes, I can ride." Stone Walker selected the gentlest mare from his string, a calm buckskin that would be safe for someone who might be weak from captivity. As he prepared the horse, he found himself stealing glances at Morning Star, still hardly able to believe. She was real. She looked older, worn by whatever trials had brought her to this place. There were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 7 years ago, and a wariness in her expression that spoke of hard lessons learned. But underneath the damage, she was still the woman he had loved, with all the passion of his young heart. "Where do we go?" Morning Star asked as Stone Walker helped her mount the mare. It was a good question. They couldn't return to his camp. Too close to Fort Bridger, too exposed. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere they could talk and begin to understand what had happened to bring them to this moment. "I know a place," Stonewalker said, swinging onto his own horse. "A canyon about 10 miles north. We'll be safe there." As they rode out of Fort Bridger, leading the string of horses behind them, Stonewalker felt as if he were living in a dream. This morning, he had been a solitary trader with nothing but his horses and his reputation. Now he was riding beside the woman whose loss had shaped the last 7 years of his life, and he had no idea what came next. The questions burned in his mind like fire. Where had Morning Star been? How had she ended up in the hands of slavers? Why had her people told him she was dead? And perhaps most importantly, did she still feel anything for the man she had once promised to marry, or had the years and whatever trials she had endured killed that love forever? As they rode toward the canyon that would give them safety and privacy, Stonewalker caught Morning Star, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. There was recognition there, and perhaps relief, but also something else. A wariness that suggested their reunion might be more complicated than either of them could imagine. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, and with each mile they put between themselves and Fort Bridger, Stonewalker felt the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. He had found Morning Star alive against all odds, but finding her was only the beginning. Now they would have to discover whether the love they had shared as young people could survive the mysteries and hardships that had separated them for 7 long years. Behind them, Fort Bridger continued its bustling trade. But for Stonewalker and Morning Star, the real business of their lives was just beginning. The canyon Stonewalker chose was a hidden sanctuary carved by ancient waters into the red sandstone cliffs. Towering walls rose on 3 sides, creating a natural fortress, accessible only through a narrow passage that could be easily defended. A clear spring bubbled up from the rock at the canyon's heart, feeding a small pool surrounded by cottonwood trees, whose leaves whispered secrets in the autumn wind. As they descended into this hidden world, Morning Star's breath caught in her throat. The canyon walls were covered with ancient petroglyphs, spirals, handprints, and hunting scenes left by peoples whose names were lost to time. But it was the more recent additions that made her heart race, symbols carved in the distinctive style of the Comanche, and among them 2 intertwined figures beneath a crescent moon. "You remember this place," Stonewalker said, watching her face as recognition dawned in her eyes. "The Canyon of 2 Hearts," Morning Star whispered, using the name they had given it during their secret meeting 7 years ago. "You still come. Here." Stonewalker dismounted and began unsaddling the horses, his movements careful and deliberate. "I came here after I heard of your death. I thought it might help me say goodbye, but I could never leave. Something always brought me back." They had discovered this canyon together during the brief, glorious summer when their love had bloomed, despite the political tensions between their peoples. Stonewalker had been part of a Comanche delegation sent to negotiate with Chief Red. Cloud and Morning Star had been chosen to serve as translator due to her gift for languages. What had begun as formal diplomatic meetings had evolved into stolen moments of conversation, then friendship, then something deeper than either had expected. As Stonewalker tended to the horses, Morning Star walked slowly around the canyon, touching the carved symbols with trembling fingers. Each mark told a story of their time together. The eagle that represented Stonewalker's spirit animal, the morning star that was her namesake, the intertwined paths that symbolized their intended union. "I carved these after you left, Stonewalker said, coming to stand beside her at the wall where their symbols were most elaborate. "My heart was full of hope then. I believed that love could overcome anything, even the hatred between our peoples. Morning Star turned to face him, and in the dappled light filtering through the cottonwood leaves, Stonewalker could see tears glistening in her extraordinary blue eyes. Stonewalker, there are things I must tell you. Things about why I disappeared, why your people told you I was dead. The truth is complicated. They settled beside the spring, the sound of bubbling water providing a peaceful backdrop to what Stonewalker sensed would be a painful conversation. Morning Star sat with the dignity he remembered, but there was a fragility about her now that spoke of trials that had tested her spirit to its limits. After you returned to your people following the peace talks, Morning Star began, her voice barely above a whisper, my father called me to his lodge. He had learned of our meetings, our growing feelings for each other. Someone had been watching, us reporting back to him. Stonewalker felt anger flare in his chest. Who? My cousin Black Hawk. He had hoped to marry me himself, to strengthen his position within the tribe. When he saw that my heart belonged to another, he went to my father with stories designed to poison him against our love. The name Black Hawk sent a chill through Stonewalker's memory. He remembered the man, arrogant, ambitious, known for his skill in battle, but also for his cruelty to captives. The thought of such a man coveting Morning Star made Stonewalker's hands clench into fists. What did Black Hawk tell your father? Morning Star's voice grew heavy with old pain. He claimed that you had boasted to other Comanche warriors about seducing the daughter of Red Cloud, that you saw our love as a way to weaken the Lakota by dividing my loyalty. He said you had laughed about how easily I had fallen for your false words. Stonewalker recoiled as if he had been struck. I never said such things. I never even spoke of you to others. Our love was too precious to share with anyone who might not understand. I know that now, Morning Star said softly, but then I was young, and my father's anger was terrible to behold. He had trusted the Comanche delegation, had opened his lodge to you in the spirit of peace, to learn that his daughter had been meeting secretly with a warrior from a people we had fought for generations. It felt like the ultimate betrayal. The pain in her voice was evident, and Stonewalker could imagine the scene. The proud chief, feeling dishonored by what he saw as his daughter's deception, the family torn apart by accusations and anger. My father gave me a choice, Morning Star continued. I could renounce you publicly, swear before the entire tribe that I had been deceived by Comanche lies, and marry Black Hawk to restore honor to our family. Or I could be exiled from the tribe forever, losing not just my home, but my identity as Red Cloud's daughter. Stonewalker felt his heart breaking all over again as he understood the impossible position she had been placed in. What did you choose? I chose you, Morning Star said, meeting his eyes directly. I told my father that I would rather be exiled than live a lie. I said that if love between a Lakota woman and a Comanche warrior was wrong, then I would gladly be wrong for the rest of my life. The courage of her choice, the depth of her sacrifice, left Stonewalker speechless. To understand what exile meant for a woman of her position, to lose not just her family, but her entire identity, her place in the world, and to choose that, rather than betray their love, spoke to a bravery that humbled him. But my father was not without love for me, Morning Star continued. In his anger, he made a terrible decision. Rather than exile me immediately, he decided to stage my death. He believed that if I appeared to die, it would end any possibility of scandal, while also protecting me from the consequences of my choice. Stonewalker's mind reeled as the implications of her words sank in. He faked your death? An elaborate deception. My father's medicine man, Spotted Elk, prepared a potion that would make me appear to die. My breathing would slow, my skin would grow cold and pale, my heartbeat would become so faint that only someone who knew what to look for could detect it. The plan was that after the funeral ceremony, when my body was placed in the burial cave, I would awaken and be secretly taken, far away, to live with distant relatives who had no connection to the Lakota. The cruelty of the deception was staggering. Stonewalker remembered the message that had reached him 3 months after his return home, that Morning Star had fallen ill with a fever and died within days. He had traveled immediately to Lakota territory, arriving just in time to see the funeral procession carrying what he believed was her body to the sacred burial caves. "I was there," Stonewalker said, his voice thick with emotion. "I came for your funeral. I saw them carry your body to the caves. I mourned you, Morning Star. I mourned you for 7 years." Tears were flowing freely down Morning Star's cheeks. "Now, I know. Spotted Elk told me later that you had come, that you had wept openly at my grave. But I was already gone by then, far away and beginning a new life that I never wanted. Where did they take you?" Morning Star looked out across the canyon, her gaze distant as she relived memories that were clearly painful. "To a small Lakota, a band that lived near the Canadian border, led by my father's elderly uncle, Chief Sitting Bear. It was supposed to be temporary, just until the scandal died down and some other arrangement could be made. But Sitting Bear was old and sick, and his band was struggling to survive in the harsh northern country." She paused, gathering herself before continuing with the most difficult part of her story. "Within 6 months of my arrival, Sitting Bear died. His son Grey Wolf became chief, but he was weak and foolish. He had accumulated debts gambling with white traders, and when he couldn't pay, he made a bargain that doomed us all." Stonewalker felt a cold dread settling in his stomach as he began to understand where her story was leading. Grey Wolf sold information about our winter camp location to a group of white slavers, Morning Star said, her voice now hollow with remembered horror. "In exchange for cancelling his debts, he told them when and where they could capture women and children with minimal resistance. The betrayal was so complete, so vile, that Stonewalker felt physically sick. A chief who would sell his own people into slavery was lower than the animals of the field. The attack came in the middle of winter, during the coldest part of the year when we were weak and unprepared for war. Most of the warriors were away on a hunting expedition that Grey Wolf had encouraged, leaving the camp vulnerable. The slavers struck at dawn, taking 12 women and children before disappearing back into the wilderness. Stonewalker could picture the scene, the terror, the desperate resistance, the helplessness of people betrayed by their own leader. His hands were shaking with rage at the thought of Morning Star being dragged away by such men. What happened to Grey Wolf? When the warriors returned and learned what he had done, they executed him immediately, but it was too late for those of us who had been taken. We were already far away, being transported south to the slave markets. Morning Star fell silent for a long moment, and Stonewalker could see that she was struggling with memories too painful to easily share. He waited patiently, knowing that she needed to tell this story at her own pace. "The next 2 years were difficult," she finally continued, her voice carefully controlled. "I was sold several times, passed from one owner to another as my value fluctuated based on market conditions and the whims of buyers. Some were merely cruel, others were monsters in human form." Stonewalker wanted to ask for details, wanted to know exactly what she had endured so that he could seek revenge on those who had harmed her. But he could see in her face that she was not ready to share those particular horrors, and he respected her need to keep some memories private. "How did you survive it?" he asked instead. Morning Star looked at him with something that might have been surprise. "I survived because of you, because of the love we shared, because of the strength you gave me, even in the darkest moments when I wanted to give up and let death take me. I would remember our time in this canyon. I would remember your voice speaking my name, your hands touching my face, your promise that nothing could ever truly separate us." Her words hit Stonewalker like physical blows. All the time, he had been mourning her death. She had been fighting for survival by holding on to memories of their love. The irony was too cruel to contemplate. I also survived because I learned to become invisible, Morningstar continued. I discovered that if I made myself appear sick or damaged, my value would decrease, and I might be sold to owners who wanted workers rather than other things. I deliberately injured my hand to make it appear crippled, learned to walk with a limp that suggested permanent damage. I became the kind of slave that brutal men didn't want, too broken to be appealing, too damaged to be worth the effort. The strategic intelligence of her survival plan impressed Stonewalker even as it broke his heart. She had deliberately damaged herself to avoid worse fates, had turned her noble beauty into a disguise that might protect her from the worst of human cruelty. But eventually, even that wasn't enough. About 6 months ago, I was sold to a man named Patterson who specialized in fixing up damaged goods for resale to premium buyers. He saw through my deceptions, realized that my injuries were mostly theatrical. He spent months trying to restore my value. Stonewalker didn't need her to elaborate on what Patterson's efforts had involved. The fear in her eyes told him everything. He needed to know about the man and his methods. How did you escape? I didn't escape, Morningstar said bitterly. Patterson's business failed. Apparently he had borrowed money from dangerous people and couldn't repay his debts. His creditors seized everything he owned, including his human property. That's how I ended up being sold at Fort Bridger. Stone. Walker absorbed this information, understanding now the chain of events that had brought Morningstar to that slave block. She hadn't been randomly captured or accidentally enslaved. She had been deliberately betrayed by her own people, then passed from one owner to another like a piece of valuable property. Morningstar, Stonewalker said carefully, in all this time, did you ever try to get word to your father, to let him know you were alive? She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. What would have been the point? My father believed. He was protecting me by staging my death. If he learned I was alive and enslaved, it would destroy him with guilt. And even if he wanted to help, what could he do? The Lakota are fighting for their very survival. They don't have the resources to search for one woman lost in the slave networks of the white world. The logic was sound, but heartbreaking. Morningstar had been cut off not just from her family, but from any hope of rescue or redemption through her own people. Besides, she added quietly, I wasn't sure I wanted to be found. The woman who was Red Cloud's daughter died in that burial cave 7 years ago. The woman who survived slavery was someone different, someone damaged and changed by experiences that noble Lakota women aren't supposed to have. Stonewalker moved closer to her, close enough to see the pain etched in every line of her face. You are still Morningstar, daughter of Red Cloud, no matter what you have endured. You are still the woman I loved, the woman I love still. She looked at him with eyes that held decades of sorrow. How can you say that? You don't know what I've done to survive, what I've been forced to become. The innocent girl you loved in this canyon is gone forever. Then I will love the woman you are now. Stonewalker said simply, I will love your strength, your intelligence, your courage in surviving what would have destroyed weaker spirits. I will love your scars because they are proof of your refusal to surrender. I will love all of you, Morningstar, because love is not about perfection. It's about accepting someone completely, including their pain. For a moment, Morningstar stared at him as if she couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. Then, suddenly, she collapsed against him, great sobs shaking her entire body as 7 years of suppressed grief and pain poured out of her. Stonewalker held her gently, stroking her hair and murmuring words of comfort in the Comanche tongue. He let her cry until she had no tears left, until her breathing began to steady and her trembling subsided. I thought I would never feel safe again, she whispered against his chest. I thought I had forgotten how to trust, how to hope. But sitting here with you in our canyon, For the first time in 7 years, I feel like I might remember how to be human again. As the sun moved across the sky above their hidden sanctuary, Stone Walker and Morning Star continued to talk, sharing the details of their separate journeys through 7 years of pain and loss. He told her about his grief-driven wandering, his eventual settling into the life of a horse trader, his gradual acceptance of a solitary existence. She shared more about her experiences as a slave, the degradations and cruelties she had endured, but also the small kindnesses that had helped her maintain her sanity. There was an old Mexican woman named Maria, Morning Star said as the afternoon wore on. She was owned by the same man who owned me for about 6 months. She taught me how to make myself less valuable without actually damaging my health permanently. She also taught me Spanish, which proved useful for understanding what buyers were saying about me. Is she still alive? I don't know. When our owner died, his property was split up among his relatives. We were separated. I never saw her again. Morning Star's voice carried the weight of someone who had lost many people over the years, who had learned not to become too attached because separation was inevitable. As evening approached, they made camp in the canyon, building a small fire near the spring and sharing the simple provisions Stone Walker carried in his traveling pack. It felt strange and wonderful to be sitting together again after so many years, but both of them could feel the weight of all they had lost and all they would need to rebuild. "What happens now?" Morning Star asked as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky above the canyon walls. It was the question Stone Walker had been dreading because he didn't have a good answer. "I don't know," he admitted. "In the eyes of white law, I bought you at that auction. You belong to me now, which is an obscenity I can barely speak aloud. But in the eyes of our peoples, we are enemies whose love is forbidden. And in your eyes," Morning Star asked softly. Stone Walker looked at her across the flickering firelight, seeing both the girl he had loved and the woman she had become. "In my eyes, you are free. You have always been free. What happened at Fort Bridger was simply a way to remove you from immediate danger. Where you go from here, what you choose to do with your life, that is entirely up to you." Morning Star was quiet for a long time, staring into the flames. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and measured. "For 7 years, I have had no choices. Every aspect of my life has been controlled by others. Where I lived, what I ate, how I dressed, who I spoke to, what work I performed. The very idea of being free to choose feels terrifying and wonderful at the same time. What would you choose if you could choose anything?" She looked up at him, and in her eyes he could see the stirring of something that might have been hope. "I would choose to stay with you, if you would have me. Not because I belong to you, not because I have nowhere else to go, but because my heart still recognizes yours across all the years and pain that have separated us." Stone Walker felt his own heart begin to beat faster. "Are you certain?" "I live a hard life, Morning Star. I travel constantly, sleep under the stars more often than under a roof. I have no permanent home, no tribe that would welcome a woman with your history." "I have lived a harder life than that," Morning Star said, with a smile that held an echo of her old spirit. "And as for my history, let people think what they will. I know who I am, and more importantly, I know who you are. That is enough." As they prepared to sleep, using Stone Walker's blankets to create a comfortable space near the dying fire, both of them were acutely aware that this was the first night they would spend together since their reunion. But they also understood that they were different people now, marked by experiences that had changed them in fundamental ways. "Stone Walker," Morning Star said quietly, as they lay side by side listening to the night sounds of the canyon. "I need you to know that I may never be able to. That is, the things that were done to me. I don't know if I can be a wife to You in all the ways that matter. Stonewalker reached over and took her hand, holding it gently in the darkness. We have time to discover what is possible between us. There is no hurry, no pressure. We will build whatever kind of life feels right for both of us, and it will be enough because it will be ours. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, and the sound echoed off the canyon walls like a lonely song. But for the first time in 7 years, neither Stonewalker nor Morning Star felt lonely. They had found each other again, against impossible odds, and while the future remained uncertain, they would face it together. As Morning Star drifted off to sleep, she found herself remembering a Lakota prayer her grandmother had taught her long ago. Great Spirit, grant me the wisdom to accept what cannot be changed, the courage to change what must be changed, and the wisdom to know the difference. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new decisions about how to build a life together in a world that would not easily accept their love. But tonight, in the Canyon of Two Hearts, they were simply two people who had found their way back to each other, and that was miracle enough for now. 3 weeks had passed since their reunion at Fort Bridger, and Stonewalker was learning that loving someone who had survived 7 years of slavery required a patience and understanding he had never needed before. Morning Star, startled at sudden movements, flinched when touched without warning, and often woke in the night, crying out in languages he didn't recognize. Fragments of Spanish, English, and dialects from tribes far from her homeland. They had established a careful routine in their hidden canyon sanctuary. Each morning, Stonewalker would rise before dawn to check his horses and scout the surrounding area for signs of pursuit or unwanted visitors. Morning Star would tend the fire and prepare their simple meals, finding comfort in the familiar domestic tasks that reminded her of her childhood in Red Cloud's village. The days were spent talking, sharing memories, and slowly rebuilding trust that had been shattered by years of separation and trauma. But as October arrived and the first frost painted the canyon walls with silver, Stonewalker knew they couldn't remain hidden forever. His horses needed better grazing than the canyon provided. Winter was approaching fast in the high country, and sooner or later someone would notice that the Comanche horse trader, who had made such a dramatic purchase at Fort Bridger, had simply vanished. More urgently, troubling news had reached them through the network of native traders who moved goods and information across the frontier. 3 riders had been asking questions in the small settlements around Fort Bridger, men who claimed to be bounty hunters looking for a runaway slave. The descriptions they gave matched Morning Star perfectly, down to her unusual blue eyes and the small scar on her left hand from a childhood accident. "They're persistent," Stonewalker said grimly as he shared this latest intelligence with Morning Star. The information had come from a Shoshone trader named Laughing Fox, who had risked considerable danger to bring word to the canyon. Whoever sent them is paying well enough to keep them motivated, despite the cold weather and difficult terrain. Morning Star received this news with the stoic acceptance of someone who had learned not to expect safety to last long. "It's Patterson," she said simply, "the man who owned me before the auction. He must have survived whatever business troubles led to my being sold, and now he wants his property back." Stonewalker felt his jaw clench with barely controlled rage. "You're not property. You're not his or anyone else's. In the eyes of white law, that's exactly what I am," Morning Star replied with bitter pragmatism. "The bill of sale from Fort Bridger might protect you from charges of theft, but it doesn't change the fact that according to their system, I'm valuable property that someone considers stolen." The injustice of it burned in Stonewalker's chest. Like acid, that a human being could be reduced to a piece of paper, bought and sold like a horse or a weapon, represented everything he despised about the white world's approach to life. But his anger wouldn't solve their immediate problem. "We need to move," he said. "This canyon won't be safe much longer. If they're asking the right questions to the right people, eventually someone will remember seeing us head in this direction. Morningstar nodded, but he could see fear flickering in her eyes. The canyon had become their sanctuary, the first place she had felt truly safe in 7 years. Leaving it meant returning to a world where danger could come from any direction, where every stranger might be a threat. "Where can we go?" she asked. "You said yourself that no tribe would welcome a woman with my history. And if we stay in white settlements, we'll always be vulnerable to men like Patterson." Stonewalker had been wrestling with exactly this problem for days. Traditional solutions, seeking shelter with friendly tribes, finding work in remote settlements, even returning to their respective peoples, all carried unacceptable risks. They needed a place where Morningstar's past didn't matter, where Stonewalker's reputation could protect them both, and where the reach of white law was limited. "I have an idea," he said slowly. "But it will require traveling through some of the most dangerous country in the territory, and there's no guarantee we'll be welcome when we arrive. Tell me." Stonewalker walked to the canyon wall where their symbols were carved, running his fingers over the intertwined paths that represented their union. "There's a place, far to the south, where the Comanche, Apache, and Mexican territories all meet. It's a lawless region where fugitives, outcasts, and free spirits gather. They call it Valle de los Perdidos, the Valley of the Lost." Morningstar joined him at the wall, studying his face as he spoke. "You've been there before?" "Once, several years ago. I was tracking stolen horses and the trail led me there. It's a community of people who have all lost their original lives for one reason or another. Deserters from various armies, escaped slaves, native people driven from their ancestral lands, white settlers who've abandoned civilization. They've created their own society with their own rules. The concept was intriguing, but also frightening. What kind of rules? Simple ones. No one asks about your past. Everyone contributes according to their abilities. Disputes are settled by counsel rather than violence when possible. And most importantly, they don't recognize the authority of any outside government, Mexican, American, or tribal. Morningstar considered this carefully. It sounded almost too good to be true, which in her experience usually meant it was. "And they would accept us?" "I think so. When I was there before, I met couples from different tribes, former slaves who had built new lives, even a few mixed families that couldn't exist safely anywhere else. The leader is a woman called Iron Butterfly. She's half Apache, half Mexican, and completely ruthless about protecting anyone who seeks sanctuary there. The idea of a place where their love wouldn't be seen as forbidden, where Morningstar could begin to heal from her trauma without fear of recapture, was almost too wonderful to contemplate. But Stonewalker could see that she was also calculating the risks. "How far south?" she asked. 300 miles, maybe more. We'd have to cross Ute territory, skirt the edges of Apache lands, and pass through country where Mexican bandits and American cavalry patrols both operate. It would take us at least 3 weeks of hard travel, assuming we don't run into serious trouble. Morningstar was quiet for a long time, weighing their options. Finally, she looked up at him with the determined expression he remembered from their youth. "When do we leave?" They spent the next 2 days preparing for the journey. Stonewalker carefully selected which horses to keep and which to release. They needed animals with stamina for long-distance travel, rather than the flashy show horses that brought top prices at trading posts. He chose 6 of his best, including the magnificent black stallion that had caught everyone's attention at Fort Bridger. Morningstar proved surprisingly helpful with the preparations. Her years of captivity had taught her to assess and pack efficiently, to identify which supplies were essential and which were merely convenient. She also possessed knowledge that Stonewalker lacked. From her various owners, she had picked up information about safe routes, dangerous territories, and the locations. of hidden water sources that could mean the difference between life and death in the desert country they would cross. Patterson used to brag about his business connections, she explained, as she drew a rough map in the dirt, marking locations to avoid. He had contacts with slave catchers and bounty hunters throughout the territory. These are the places where they operate, the towns where they have friends among the local authorities. Her strategic intelligence impressed Stonewalker, even as it reminded him of the skills she had been forced to develop simply to survive. She had become a student of human nature and territorial politics, not from curiosity, but from necessity. On their final night in the canyon, they performed a private ceremony by the spring. Using charcoal from their fire and clay from the water's edge, they painted symbols on each other's faces, protective signs that would guard them during the dangerous journey ahead. It was an ancient custom that transcended the boundaries between their peoples, a way of invoking the spirit's protection for travelers venturing into unknown lands. "If we don't survive this journey," Morningstar said as she completed the intricate pattern on Stonewalker's forehead, "I want you to know that these weeks in the canyon have been the happiest of my adult life. You gave me back something I thought was lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope," she said simply, "the belief that life could be more than just enduring from one day to the next." Stonewalker took her hands in his, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and harder times. "We will survive. We will reach the Valley of the Lost, and we will build a life there that honors everything we've been through." They left the canyon before dawn, when the October air was sharp with frost, and their breath formed clouds in the pale light. Stonewalker had chosen a route that would keep them away from established trails and settlements, following game paths and natural corridors that would make them harder to track. For the first 3 days, they made good time through familiar country. Stonewalker knew this region well from his years of horse trading, and they were able to find shelter in caves and hidden valleys that provided protection from both weather and unwanted attention. Morningstar adapted quickly to life on the trail, her body remembering skills from her youth, even as her mind remained alert for dangers that hadn't existed in her sheltered childhood. On the 4th day, everything changed. They were following a narrow canyon that would lead them to a mountain pass when Stonewalker's lead horse suddenly raised its head, ears pricked forward in alarm. Years of frontier life had taught him to trust his animal's instincts, and he immediately signaled for Morningstar to stop. The sound reached them moments later, the distinctive rhythm of shod hooves on stone, moving fast and with purpose. Someone was coming down the canyon toward them, and from the sound, it was multiple riders pushing their mounts hard. Stonewalker quickly guided their small group into a side passage, barely wide enough for the horses, pressing them back into the shadows, between towering rock walls. Through a gap in the stone, he could see the main canyon trail where their pursuers would pass. The riders appeared within minutes, 4 men on well-rested horses, armed with rifles and moving with the focused intensity of professional hunters. Stonewalker recognized the type immediately. Bounty hunters, men who made their living tracking fugitives across the frontier's most dangerous territories. The leader was a lean man with graying hair and the kind of patient, calculating eyes that marked him as someone who rarely failed to catch his quarry. He raised his hand to halt the group directly opposite Stonewalker's hiding place, close enough that conversations could be clearly heard. "Fresh tracks," the leader said, dismounting to examine the ground. 2 riders, one riding double or leading. "Pack animals, maybe 6 hours ahead of us." One of the other men, a younger rider with nervous energy, spat tobacco juice into the dust. "Could be anyone, Dutch. Plenty of folks use this trail." The leader, Dutch, shook his head as he studied the hoofprints more carefully. These matched the tracks from the canyon where they were hiding. Same horse, same rider. It's them. Stonewalker felt his blood turn to ice as he realized the implications. Somehow, these men had found their sanctuary, had discovered the canyon of Two Hearts, and followed their trail from there. The safe haven where he and Morning Star had spent their precious weeks of reunion had been compromised. "How the hell did they track us to the canyon?" the nervous man continued. "That place was more hidden than a snake's belly." Dutch stood up, brushing dirt from his hands, with the satisfaction of a man who took pride in his professional skills. Let Shoshone trader Laughing Fox took some persuasion, but he eventually remembered seeing a Comanche with a string of horses heading in that direction. Amazing how cooperative folks become when they understand the consequences of lying to us. Stonewalker's heart sank as he understood what had happened. Laughing Fox, the man who had risked danger to bring them warning about their pursuers, had been captured and forced to reveal what he knew. The brave trader had probably died for his efforts to help them. "So we're definitely on the right trail," a third man said. This one was massive, with arms like tree trunks and a voice that suggested limited intelligence but unlimited capacity. "For violence? When we catch up to them, do we take the woman alive?" Dutch remounted his horse, his movements economical and professional. "Patterson wants her back functional. She's valuable property and damaged goods bring lower prices. But the Indian..." He shrugged. "Patterson doesn't care what happens to him, as long as he doesn't interfere with the recovery of his investment." The casual way they discussed Morning Star's recapture and Stonewalker's probable death chilled him to the bone. These weren't desperate men acting from passion or prejudice. They were businessmen conducting a transaction, and human lives were merely items on their ledger. As the bounty hunters resumed their pursuit, Stonewalker waited until the sound of hooves faded completely before emerging from hiding. Morning Star's face was pale but determined as she met his eyes. "They're professional trackers," she said quietly. "They won't give up easily." Stonewalker nodded grimly. "And they're only 6 hours behind us. In this terrain, with their fresh horses, they'll cut that lead in half by evening." The situation had become desperate. They couldn't outrun professional hunters on superior mounts, especially while leading a string of horses that slowed their progress. They couldn't hide indefinitely in country where their pursuers clearly knew how to track. And they couldn't fight. 4 armed men against 1 warrior and a woman was not odds that any sane person would accept. "We need to separate," Stonewalker said, the words tasting like poison in his mouth. "I'll take the horses and lead them away from your trail. You can travel faster alone, maybe find somewhere to hide until..." "No." Morning Star's voice carried absolute finality. "We found each other again after 7 years of believing the other was dead. I won't be separated from you by fear of what might happen. Morning Star, be practical. If they capture us both, then we face that together," she interrupted. "Stonewalker, I have lived 7 years as a slave, 7 years of being separated from everything and everyone I loved. I would rather die free beside you than live another day as Patterson's property." The courage in her voice, the absolute certainty of her choice, reminded Stonewalker why he had fallen in love with her in the first place. Morning Star had always possessed a core of steel beneath her gentle exterior, a strength that no amount of suffering could break. "All right," he said finally, "then we make our stand together. But not here, not in the open, where their numbers and firepower give them every advantage." Stonewalker's mind raced as he considered their options. They needed terrain that would neutralize the bounty hunters' advantages, somewhere that would force a confrontation on more equal terms. And suddenly he remembered something from his previous journey through this region, a place where the landscape itself could become an ally. "There's a slot canyon about 2 miles ahead," he said, hope beginning to kindle in his chest. "The walls are so narrow that riders have to go single file, and there are places where a rock slide could block the passage completely." Morning Star understood immediately. "You want to trap them in the canyon?" If we can get ahead of them and trigger a slide at the right moment, we could pin them down long enough to escape, or at least force them to come at us one at a time instead of all together. It was a desperate plan, with numerous ways it could go wrong, but it offered something their current situation lacked: a chance to take control of the encounter rather than simply react to their pursuers' moves. They pushed their horses hard. For the next 2 hours, using every shortcut and game trail Stone Walker could remember to reach the slot canyon before their hunters caught up. The narrow passage was even more dramatic than he had recalled. Towering walls of red sandstone rising hundreds of feet on either side, leaving only a ribbon of blue sky visible overhead. About halfway through the canyon, Stone Walker found what he was looking for: a section where ancient erosion had left massive boulders precariously balanced on a narrow ledge about 50 feet above the trail. With the right application of force in the right place, those boulders could be brought down to block the passage. "Can you handle the horses?" Stone Walker asked as he studied the rock formation, calculating angles and stress points. Morning Star was already gathering the lead ropes. "I grew up with horses, Stone Walker. These will follow me anywhere." While Morning Star led their animals to safety beyond the potential rockslide zone, Stone Walker climbed the canyon wall to reach the unstable boulder formation. The climb was treacherous, with handholds that crumbled under his weight and loose rock that could betray his presence to anyone below. When he reached the ledge, Stone Walker used his tomahawk to carefully excavate around the base of the largest boulder, undermining its support just enough that a strong push would send it tumbling. The work was painstakingly slow. Too much force would trigger the slide prematurely. Too little would leave the trap ineffective. The sound of approaching hooves echoed off the canyon walls just as Stone Walker finished his preparations. He pressed himself against the rock face, tomahawk ready, and waited for the bounty hunters to enter his carefully prepared trap. Dutch appeared first, moving cautiously through the narrow passage with the professional wariness of a man who had survived many dangerous situations. The other three followed in single file, their horses nervous in the confined space between towering walls. Stone Walker waited until all 4 men were directly below the unstable boulder formation. Then, putting all his strength behind the effort, he drove his shoulder against the undermined rock. The boulder shifted, teetered for a heart-stopping moment, then began its thunderous descent. The massive stone struck the canyon floor with earth-shaking force, followed immediately by a cascade of smaller rocks that had been dislodged by the impact. When the dust cleared, the canyon passage was completely blocked by a wall of stone 15 feet high. 3 of the bounty hunters were trapped on the far side, their shouts of anger and frustration echoing off the canyon walls. But Dutch, the leader, had been quick enough to spur his horse forward when the rockslide began, and he now found himself on the same side of the barrier as Stone Walker and Morning Star. The Comanche warrior dropped from the canyon wall to land, in a crouch beside the trail, tomahawk in one hand and knife in the other. Dutch was already swinging his rifle around, but Stone Walker was faster, throwing his knife with deadly accuracy to knock the weapon from the bounty hunter's hands. "You've caused me considerable inconvenience, Indian," Dutch said, his voice remarkably calm for a man who had just lost his weapon and found himself facing a Comanche warrior in single combat. "A good," Stone Walker replied, beginning to circle his opponent with the fluid grace of a predator. "I was hoping you'd take it personally." The fight that followed was brief but vicious. Dutch was skilled with his hands and had the advantage of size and reach, but Stone Walker possessed the speed and training of a warrior who had survived countless battles. When it was over, the bounty hunter lay unconscious in the canyon dust, and Stone Walker was gathering weapons and supplies from the man's saddlebags. From beyond the rockslide barrier, angry voices could be heard as the remaining hunters tried to find a way around the obstruction. They would succeed eventually. There were other routes through the canyon system, but it would take them hours or even days to navigate the alternatives. Morning Star emerged from her hiding place leading. Their horses, her eyes bright with admiration for Stonewalker's tactical brilliance. "That was magnificently done," she said, "but they'll find another way through eventually." Stonewalker was already securing Dutch's weapons and ammunition to their pack saddles. "By the time they do, we'll be long gone. And now we have supplies and intelligence about Patterson's operation that might prove useful." Among Dutch's possessions, they found a detailed map showing safe houses and contacts throughout the territory, along with a letter of credit that would allow them to purchase supplies at various trading posts. Most importantly, they discovered a written contract specifying the terms of Patterson's arrangement with the bounty hunters, information that revealed the full scope of the man's slave trading network. As they rode away from the Slot Canyon, leaving their unconscious enemy and his trapped companions behind, both Stonewalker and Morning Star felt a grim satisfaction. They had faced their first real test as fugitives and emerged victorious through courage, intelligence, and teamwork, but they also understood that this was just the beginning. Patterson's network was vast and well-funded, and the man would not give up easily on recovering what he considered valuable property. The journey to the Valley of the Lost would be fraught with dangers they could barely imagine. Yet as they rode south through the gathering dusk, following ancient trails toward a sanctuary that might or might not welcome them, both felt something that had been missing from their lives for too long. Hope tempered by determination, love strengthened by shared danger and the unshakable conviction that together they could overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. The hunter's moon rose full and bright over the canyon country, casting their shadows long across the trail as they rode toward an uncertain but chosen future. 18 days after their escape from the Slot Canyon, Stonewalker and Morning Star crested a ridge that revealed their destination spread out in the valley below. Valle de los Perdidos lay hidden between towering mesas like a secret kept by the desert itself, an oasis of green in a landscape of red rock and thorny scrub. Cottonwoods lined a meandering stream that cut through the valley floor, and scattered among the trees were adobe buildings, corrals, and cultivated fields that spoke of a thriving community. But what struck Stonewalker most powerfully was how defensible the place appeared. The valley had only two entrances, narrow passes at either end that could be easily blocked or defended. Watchtowers built into the mesa walls commanded views of the surrounding country for miles in every direction. This wasn't just a refuge for outcasts and fugitives. It was a fortress designed by people who understood that their safety depended on their ability to keep the outside world at bay. Morning Star studied the scene with the analytical eye she had developed during her years of captivity. "It's larger than I expected," she said. "There must be 200 people living down there." "At least," Stonewalker agreed. "And look at the fields. They're not just surviving here, they're prospering." The evidence of prosperity was unmistakable. Extensive irrigation channels distributed water from the central stream to terraced gardens where corn, beans, and squash grew in neat rows. Herds of cattle and horses grazed in fenced pastures, while flocks of sheep and goats wandered the hillsides under the watchful eyes of mounted shepherds. This was a community that had moved far beyond mere survival to create something approaching civilization in the wilderness. As they began their descent into the valley, riders emerged from concealed positions among the rocks. Stonewalker counted at least 6, though he suspected there were others he couldn't see. The watchers approached slowly, weapons visible but not directly threatening, the posture of people prepared for trouble but hoping to avoid it. The lead rider was a woman of perhaps 40 years, with the weathered face of someone who had spent her life outdoors and the confident bearing of a natural leader. Her mixed heritage was immediately apparent, Apache cheekbones and dark hair combined with lighter skin that suggested Spanish ancestry. She wore practical clothing adapted from both cultures, a buckskin shirt decorated with silver conchos, canvas pants tucked into high boots, and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded intelligent brown eyes. "I am Iron Butterfly," she said without preamble, as her group surrounded Stone Walker and Morning Star. Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making decisions that affected many lives. "You're the Comanche horse trader who..." It caused such excitement at Fort Bridger. Stonewalker wasn't surprised that news of their dramatic purchase and disappearance had reached even this remote valley. The Frontier's informal communication network was remarkably efficient, and an event as unusual as a Comanche warrior paying top dollar for a slave would have been discussed at every trading post and campfire for hundreds of miles. "I am Stone Walker of the Comanche," he replied formally. "This is Morning Star of the Lakota. We seek sanctuary in your valley." Iron Butterfly's gaze shifted to Morning Star, and Stone Walker saw immediate recognition of what the other woman had endured. There was a hardness in Iron Butterfly's eyes that spoke of personal experience with the kind of suffering that left permanent marks on the soul. "Sanctuary is not freely given here," Iron Butterfly said. "It must be earned. What skills do you bring to our community? What can you contribute to our survival?" The question was fair and practical. A community surviving in hostile territory couldn't afford to support people who couldn't pull their own weight. Stonewalker gestured toward his string of horses, which had attracted admiring glances from Iron Butterfly's riders. "I breed and train horses. I also know the trading routes throughout the territory and have contacts among many tribes. I can bring valuable intelligence about military movements, tribal politics, and commercial opportunities." Iron Butterfly nodded approvingly, then turned her attention to Morning Star. "And you?" Morning Star straightened in her saddle. "And Stone." Walker could see her drawing on reserves of strength and dignity that her captivity had never quite managed to break. "I speak 7 languages: Lakota, Comanche, Apache, Spanish, English, French, and some German. I can read and write in 3 of them. I know traditional healing methods from multiple tribes, and I understand the business practices of white traders and government officials." The value of such skills was immediately apparent to Iron Butterfly and her companions. In a community that dealt with diverse groups of people and needed to navigate the complex politics of the frontier, a translator and cultural interpreter would be invaluable. "Impressive," Iron Butterfly said. "But skills can be taught. Character cannot. Why? Should we trust you? What guarantee do we have that you won't bring trouble to our valley?" Stonewalker started to speak, but Morning Star held up a hand to stop him. This was her question to answer, and she met Iron Butterfly's challenging gaze directly. "You shouldn't trust us," Morning Star said simply. "Trust must be earned through actions, not words. But I will tell you this, we have both lost everything that once defined us. Our tribes, our families, our identities from our former lives. What we seek here is not just safety, but the chance to build something new together. We have no interest in bringing the conflicts of the outside world into your sanctuary." Iron Butterfly studied Morning Star for a long moment, and Stonewalker could sense some kind of silent communication passing between the two women. Finally, the valley's leader nodded slightly. "We'll give you a trial period," she decided. 1 month to prove your value to the community and demonstrate that you can live by our laws. If you succeed, you'll be welcomed as full members. If you fail," she shrugged eloquently. "What are your laws?" Stonewalker asked. "Simple ones," Iron Butterfly replied, as she turned her horse to lead them down into the valley. "No violence against community members except in self-defense. All able-bodied. Adults contribute according to their abilities. Major decisions are made by council, minor ones by whoever is most affected. No one's past matters as long as they don't bring it into the present. And most importantly, what happens in Valle de los Perdidos stays in Valle de los Perdidos. As they rode toward the settlement, Stonewalker and Morning Star were struck by the diversity of the people they encountered. Children with features that reflected every possible combination of native, Spanish and Anglo heritage played together. In the stream, women in traditional Apache dress worked alongside others, wearing the practical clothing of frontier settlers. Men with the bearing of former soldiers shared tasks with others who had clearly been craftsmen or traders in their previous lives. The architecture reflected the same cultural fusion. Adobe buildings in the Spanish style stood next to native wickiups and Anglo cabins, all adapted to the desert environment with thick walls and deep porches that provided protection from the harsh sun. Gardens surrounded every dwelling, creating an oasis effect that made the entire settlement feel like a green jewel set in the red desert. Iron Butterfly led them to a small adobe house near the edge of the settlement, surrounded by a corral and a few outbuildings that would be perfect for Stonewalker's horse breeding operation. This belonged to a family that moved on last spring, she explained. If you decide to stay and we decide to keep you, it can be yours. For now, consider it temporary lodging. The house was simple but well built, with thick walls that would keep it cool in summer and warm in winter. A main room served as both kitchen and living area, while two smaller rooms provided private sleeping spaces. Previous occupants had left behind basic furniture and household items, evidence of the valley's cooperative spirit. There's a community meeting tonight, Iron Butterfly continued. Everyone will want to meet the newcomers and hear your stories. Be prepared for questions. Our people are naturally curious about the outside world, especially when that world has produced refugees as interesting as yourselves. After Iron Butterfly and her escort departed, Stonewalker and Morning Star spent the rest of the day settling into their temporary home and exploring their immediate surroundings. The house felt strange after weeks of sleeping under the stars, but also wonderfully secure. For the first time since leaving the Canyon of Two Hearts, Morning Star seemed to relax completely. It feels like a real home, she said as she examined the kitchen area, running her hands over the hand-hewn table and the clay vessels arranged on wooden shelves. Not just a place to hide or rest, but somewhere people actually live. Stonewalker understood what she meant. During their journey south, they had camped in caves, abandoned ruins and hidden valleys, temporary shelters that offered protection, but never comfort. This house, modest as it was, represented something different, the possibility of permanence, of building a life rather than simply surviving from one day to the next. The community meeting that evening was held in a large circular structure at the heart of the settlement. Built in the traditional Apache style, but enlarged to accommodate the entire population, it featured a central fire pit surrounded by concentric rings of seating that could hold several hundred people. As Stonewalker and Morning Star entered the gathering, conversations gradually quieted and heads turned in their direction. The curiosity was intense, but not hostile. These were people who understood what it meant to seek refuge from a hostile world, and they extended the courtesy of suspended judgment to newcomers. Iron Butterfly rose from her seat near the central fire and gestured for Stonewalker and Morning Star to join her in the circle of community leaders. As they took their places, Stonewalker noticed the careful balance of the leadership group, representatives from all the major cultural groups in the valley, both men and women, people of various ages and backgrounds united by their commitment to the community's survival. We gather tonight to welcome potential new members to our family, Iron Butterfly began, her voice carrying clearly throughout the large space. Stonewalker of the Comanche and Morning Star of the Lakota have traveled far to reach our valley, fleeing persecution and seeking sanctuary among us. She paused, allowing her words to sink in before continuing. As is our custom, they will share their stories with us, and we will decide whether they are people we can trust with our safety and our secrets. Stone Walker stood first, acutely, aware that his words would determine not just his own fate, but Morning Star's as well. He looked around the circle, meeting the eyes of people whose own stories had undoubtedly brought them through hardships equal to his own. I was born a Comanche. Warrior, he began, but I learned that the heart recognizes no boundaries between peoples. 7 years ago, I fell in love with Morning Star during a peace conference between our tribes. When her father discovered our relationship, he faked her death to separate us. I have spent the years since believing she was lost forever, trading horses across the frontier and carrying the weight of a love I thought was buried. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the gathering. Many of these people had experienced similar losses. Families destroyed by war, loves separated by circumstances beyond their control, identities shattered by forces too large to resist. 3 weeks ago, fate brought us together at Fort Bridger. Stone Walker continued. Morning Star was being sold as a slave, and I bought her freedom without knowing who she was. When I saw her face, he paused, the memory still overwhelming him. When I saw her face, I learned that some miracles are real, and some loves are stronger than death itself. He sat down to supportive murmurs and nods from the gathered community. Then Morning Star rose, and Stone Walker could see her drawing on every reserve of courage and dignity she possessed. I have been many things in my life, she began, her clear voice carrying to every corner of the gathering. A chief's daughter, a promised wife, a captive, a slave, and now, hopefully, a free woman building a new life with the man I love. She told her story simply and directly. The forced separation, the staged death, the years of slavery and degradation. She spoke of survival and endurance, of keeping hope alive in the darkest circumstances, of learning that identity comes not from what others call you, but from what you choose to be. I don't ask you to forget what I have been, she concluded, but I hope you will judge me by what I choose to become. I want to be a member of this community, a contributor to its success, and a person worthy of the freedom you offer. The silence that followed her words was profound and respectful. Then an elderly Apache man near the fire stood up. I have a question for both of you, he said in a voice that carried the weight of many years and much wisdom. You have found each other again after great loss and suffering. You could go anywhere now, start over in any number of places. Why choose to settle among strangers in a hidden valley? Why not return to your own peoples and seek reconciliation there? It was a perceptive question that went to the heart of their motivations. Stone Walker and Morning Star exchanged glances before Morning Star answered. Because this is a place where the past doesn't define the future, she said. Among our own peoples, we would always be the Comanche and Lakota who betrayed tribal loyalty for love. We would be accepted, perhaps, but never truly welcomed. Here, we can be simply Stone Walker and Morning Star, two people who choose to love each other and contribute to something larger than ourselves. Stone Walker nodded in agreement. And because, he added, we have learned that family is not just about blood and birth. It's about the people who accept you as you are and support you in becoming who you want to be. If you'll have us, we would like to make our family here among you. The discussion that followed was lengthy and sometimes intense. Various community members asked detailed questions about Stone Walker's horse-breeding expertise, Morning Star's language and healing skills, their knowledge of the outside world, and their ability to integrate into the valley's cooperative culture. Some concerns were raised about the possibility that their presence might attract unwanted attention to the valley. Stone Walker addressed this by describing their careful journey south and the precautions they had taken to ensure they weren't followed. He also shared intelligence from the captured bounty hunters' documents about Patterson's network and the methods slave catchers used to track fugitives. "We represent no ongoing threat to the valley's security," he concluded. "If anything, our knowledge of how our enemies operate makes the entire community safer." When the formal discussion ended, Iron Butterfly called for the decision. In the democratic tradition of the Valley, all adult members had an equal voice in determining whether newcomers would be accepted. The vote was overwhelming in their favor. As the meeting dispersed and people came forward to welcome them personally, to the community, Stonewalker felt a profound sense of relief and gratitude. For the first time in 7 years, he and Morning Star were surrounded by people who accepted their love without reservation, who saw their differences as strengths rather than problems to be solved. An elderly Mexican woman named Esperanza, who served as the Valley's primary healer, immediately claimed Morning Star as an apprentice. "Your knowledge of different tribal medicines combined with my Spanish herbal traditions could create healing methods more powerful than either alone," she said with obvious excitement. A former cavalry officer named Captain Reynolds, who had deserted rather than participate in the massacre of peaceful native villages, expressed interest in Stonewalker's intelligence about military movements in the territory. "The Army's plans affect all of us," he explained. "The more we know about their intentions, the better we can prepare for what's coming." But it was a conversation with Iron Butterfly herself that most moved Stonewalker. As the crowd dispersed, and people headed home to their families, the Valley's leader drew him aside for a private word. "You should know," she said quietly, "that your story reminds me of my own. I was also separated from the man I loved by the prejudices of others. Unlike you, I never found him again. He died in a Mexican prison before we could be reunited." Walker saw pain in her eyes that matched his own memories of loss. "I'm sorry." Iron Butterfly shrugged with the philosophical acceptance of someone who had made peace with tragedy. "It was long ago, but seeing you and Morning Star together gives me hope that some loves are indeed stronger than the forces that try to destroy them. That's why I voted to accept you, not just for your skills, but because you represent something this valley needs." "What's that?" "Proof that happy endings are possible," Iron Butterfly said with a sad smile. "That sometimes, despite everything the world does to break us, love wins." Over the following days, Stonewalker and Morning Star threw themselves into valley life with an energy born of gratitude and determination. Stonewalker began working with the community's existing horses, improving their breeding program and training methods. His expertise was immediately apparent, and soon other horse owners from throughout the region were seeking his services. Morning Star divided her time between working with Esperanza on healing methods and serving as a translator for the valley's dealings with various outside groups. Her linguistic abilities proved invaluable in negotiations with Mexican traders, Apache bands, and even occasional government officials who needed to conduct business in the valley. But perhaps most importantly, they began to heal from the emotional wounds their separation had inflicted. Living in a community that accepted their love without reservation allowed them to rediscover the joy they had once shared. They could walk hand in hand through the settlement without attracting stares or whispers. They could plan for a future together without fear that circumstances beyond their control would tear them apart again. 3 weeks into their trial month, Morning Star made an announcement that surprised everyone, including Stonewalker. "I want to start a school," she said during a community meeting. "There are over 30 children in the valley, and while they're learning practical skills from their parents, they're not learning to read and write in multiple languages. In a place where people from so many different cultures live together, literacy could be a bridge that brings us even closer. The idea was immediately popular, especially among parents who wanted their children to have opportunities they themselves had never enjoyed. Within days, a location had been chosen and materials gathered for the valley's first formal school. As Stone Walker watched Morning Star work with the children, teaching them to read simple words in Spanish and English, while also sharing stories. From Lakota tradition, he felt a profound sense of completeness. This was the woman he had fallen in love with. Intelligent, compassionate, determined to make the world better for those around her. The suffering she had endured had deepened her wisdom without breaking her spirit. On the last night of their trial month, they sat together on the porch of their adobe house, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. The sounds of the valley settling into evening, children's laughter, adult conversations, the distant lowing of cattle, created a symphony of peace that neither had experienced in years. "Do you think we'll be accepted permanently?" Morning Star asked, though. Her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Stone Walker pulled her closer, marveling again at the miracle of her presence in his life. "I think we've already found our home," he said. "The vote tomorrow will just make it official." As if to confirm his words, the sound of music drifted across the valley. Someone playing a guitar, while others sang a song that blended Spanish melodies with native rhythms. It was the sound of cultures combining to create something new and beautiful, just as he and Morning Star had combined their separate stories to create a love that had survived everything the world could throw at it. The Valley of the Lost had given them more than sanctuary. It had given them the chance to build a life together that honored both their past and their dreams for the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight they were simply two people in love, surrounded by a community that celebrated rather than condemned their happiness. For the first time in 7 years, both Stone Walker and Morning Star fell asleep without fear, surrounded by the sounds of home. 2 years had passed since Stone Walker and Morning Star arrived in Valle de los Perdidos, and their integration into the community had exceeded everyone's expectations. Stone Walker's horse breeding program had made the valley famous throughout the Southwest, attracting buyers from Mexico City to Santa Fe who paid premium prices for animals trained with his unique combination of Comanche expertise and gentle patience. Morning Star's school had grown from 30 children to over 60, as families from neighboring settlements sent their young ones to learn from the woman who could teach them to navigate multiple worlds with equal fluency. But it was on a crisp November morning that their greatest test arrived, in the form none of them had anticipated. A scout named Miguel came racing into the valley with news that sent shockwaves through the entire community. A large group of Lakota warriors, led by a chief flying Red Cloud's personal banner, was approaching from the north. They had been asking questions at every settlement and trading post along their route, seeking information about a woman with unusual blue eyes who might have been seen in the area. "They're not hostile," Miguel reported to the emergency council meeting that Iron Butterfly called immediately. "But they're persistent. And they're not alone. There are white officials with them, men in suits who look like government agents." Stone Walker felt his blood turn to ice as the implications became clear. After 2 years of safety and happiness, the outside world had finally found them. But why now? And why was Morning Star's father involved? Morning Star herself received the news with characteristic composure, though Stone Walker could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her hands trembled slightly as she processed the information. "How many warriors?" she asked. "About 20, Miguel replied, "plus the white men and what looks like a medicine man or elder." Iron Butterfly studied the map spread on the council table, calculating distances and travel times. "They'll reach our outer sentries by tomorrow afternoon. That gives us perhaps 24 hours to decide how to handle this." The discussion that followed was intense. Some community members argued for denying any knowledge of Morning Star's presence, maintaining the valley's traditional policy of protecting its residents from outside interference. Others suggested that meeting with the Lakota delegation might actually resolve the situation more permanently than continued hiding. "We need to know what they want," said Captain Reynolds, who had experience with government negotiations. "If this is just a father looking for his daughter, that's one thing. But if those government agents are involved in some larger scheme..." Stone Walker found himself thinking of the bounty hunters they had evaded years earlier, of Patterson's network and the documents they had captured. Could this somehow be connected to those old threats? "I should meet with them," Morning Star said quietly, and the room fell silent as everyone turned to look at her. "Whatever they want, whatever this is about, hiding will only delay the inevitable. If my father has traveled this far to find me, there must be a reason beyond simple family concern." Stone Walker reached for her hand, his voice thick with emotion. "Morning Star, you don't owe him anything. He's the one who staged your death, who forced you into the circumstances that led to your enslavement." She squeezed his fingers gently, her blue eyes holding depths of wisdom earned through suffering. "I know, but he's also my father, and he raised me to face difficulties with courage rather than hide from them. Besides," she added with a slight smile, "I'm curious to see what could possibly be important enough to bring Red Cloud's delegation to this remote valley." Iron Butterfly nodded slowly. "If that's your decision, we'll support it. But we do this on our terms, in our territory, with our people present to ensure your safety." The plan they developed was elegant in its simplicity. Iron Butterfly would meet the Lakota delegation at the valley's northern entrance with a small escort that included both Stone Walker and Morning Star. The meeting would be formal and diplomatic, with clear protocols that established the valley's sovereignty and neutrality. As the sun set over the desert mesas, Stone Walker and Morning Star prepared for what might be their final night of peace. They walked to their favorite spot overlooking the valley, where cottonwood trees whispered ancient secrets and the lights of their adopted home twinkled like fallen stars. "Are you afraid?" Stone Walker asked as they settled on a blanket beneath the stars. Morning Star considered the question seriously. "Not afraid exactly, but uncertain. I thought I had closed the door on my life as Red Cloud's daughter. I've built something new here, something that belongs entirely to me. I'm not sure I want to revisit the girl I used to be." Stone Walker understood completely. They had both undergone profound transformations during their time in the valley, becoming more fully themselves than they had ever been before. The idea of returning to old identities and ancient conflicts felt like a betrayal of the people they had worked so hard to become. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "we face it together. No force on earth will separate us again." Morning Star turned to look at him, her face luminous in the starlight. "Stone Walker, there's something I need to tell you. Something I've been waiting for the right moment to share." The seriousness in her voice made his heart skip. "What is it?" She took his hands in hers, her smile growing radiant. "I'm carrying your child." The words hit Stone Walker like a physical blow, overwhelming him with joy so intense it was almost painful. After years of believing they had lost everything, after surviving separation and slavery and the long journey to freedom, they were going to create new life together. "Are you certain?" he whispered, hardly daring to believe it. Esperanza confirmed. Yesterday, the baby will come in late spring when the desert flowers bloom." Morning Star's voice held a wonder that matched his own. "Stone Walker, we're going to be a family." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. The timing of this revelation, on the eve of meeting with her father, seemed like a message from the spirits themselves. Whatever Red Cloud wanted, whatever complications his arrival might bring, they would face them as parents protecting their future child. The next day dawned clear and bright, with the kind of crystalline air that made every detail of the landscape stand out in sharp relief. The Lakota delegation was impressive. 20 warriors in full regalia, their faces painted for formal ceremony, led by a sub-chief stone walker recognized as Black Elk, one of Red Cloud's most trusted lieutenants. But it was the presence of the white officials that truly intrigued him. 3 men in expensive suits, accompanied by a military officer whose uniform suggested high rank, rode with the Lakota as equals rather than prisoners or guides. Whatever this was about, it represented some kind of official business between the U.S. government and the Lakota Nation. The meeting took place in a natural amphitheater near the valley's entrance, with representatives from both sides facing each other across a circle marked with traditional symbols of peace and neutrality. Iron Butterfly spoke first, welcoming the delegation while also establishing the valley's independence from outside authority. Black Elk responded with formal courtesy, explaining that they came seeking Red Cloud's daughter, who was believed to be living in this region. Her father has important news that affects not just her family, but potentially the future of our people, he said, his eyes searching the valley delegation until they found Morningstar's distinctive features. I am Morningstar, daughter of Red Cloud, she said, rising to face the delegation. I'm surprised to see you here, Uncle, after so many years of believing I was dead to my people. Black Elk's composed expression flickered with emotion as he saw her clearly for the first time. My niece, he said softly, you have been mourned and missed more than you can know. Your father has carried the burden of what he did every day since your disappearance. One of the white officials stepped forward then, a distinguished man with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. Miss Morningstar, he said in careful, formal tones, my name is Commissioner Williams. I represent the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and I bring news that will change everything you thought you knew about your situation. Morningstar's hand found Stone Walker's, drawing strength from his presence. What news? Commissioner Williams produced a leather document case and withdrew several official-looking papers. 3 months ago, a man named Patterson was arrested in St. Louis for operating an illegal slave trading network. During the investigation of his business, federal agents discovered evidence of numerous crimes, including the fraudulent enslavement of free persons. Stone Walker felt his pulse quicken as the implications became clear. Patterson, the man who had owned Morningstar, who had sent bounty hunters after them, had finally been brought to justice. Among the evidence seized from Patterson's operation, the commissioner continued, were detailed records of his victims, including documentation proving that you were illegally enslaved. According to these records, you were a free woman of noble birth who was kidnapped and sold into slavery through fraudulent means. Morningstar stood perfectly still, processing this information. What does this mean? It means, said Commissioner Williams, that your enslavement was illegal from the beginning. You were never legally property, never legally owned by anyone. The federal government is prepared to offer you substantial compensation for the injustices you suffered as well, as assistance in reintegrating into your former life. Black Elk stepped forward again, his voice thick with emotion. More than that, my daughter, your father wishes to formally restore your position as his heir and potential future leader of our people. The world is changing, and he believes that someone with your unique experiences and knowledge could help guide the Lakota through the difficult times ahead. The magnitude of what they were offering was staggering. Not just freedom, which Morningstar already enjoyed in the valley, but recognition, compensation, and the possibility of reclaiming her birthright as Red Cloud's daughter. It was everything she had lost 7 years ago, returned to her with interest, But Stone Walker could see in her eyes that she was thinking not just of what she was being offered, but of what accepting it would cost. "I need time to consider this," Morningstar said finally. "These are not decisions to be made hastily." "Of course," Commissioner Williams agreed. "However, I should mention that there are time constraints involved. The legal proceedings against Patterson's network are ongoing, and your testimony could be crucial in ensuring that justice is served and other victims are compensated." Iron Butterfly spoke for the first time since the formal presentations began. "The Valley offers hospitality to all members of this delegation for as long as needed. No one will be pressured to make hasty decisions about such important matters." As the formal meeting concluded and arrangements were made for the delegation's temporary accommodation, Stone Walker and Morningstar walked away from the gathering in thoughtful silence. The world had just offered to return everything they had lost, but they both understood that accepting might mean losing everything they had found. That evening, as they sat together in their adobe house while representatives from both their old and new lives shared meals and stories in the valley's common areas, Morningstar placed Stonewalker's hand on her still flat belly. "Whatever we decide," she said quietly, "we decide as a family. Our child deserves to know all the possibilities available to them, but also to grow up with parents who chose love over obligation, freedom over duty." Stonewalker kissed her forehead gently, marveling again at her wisdom. Tomorrow would bring difficult decisions about their future, but tonight they were simply two people in love, expecting their first child, surrounded by a community that had accepted them completely. The greatest test of their love was about to begin, but they would face it as they had faced everything else, together, with courage and hope for the future they were building one day at a time. 3 days of intense deliberation had passed since the delegation's arrival, and Morningstar had made her decision. Standing before the assembled representatives from 3 different worlds, her Lakota heritage, the U.S. government, and Valle de los Perdidos, she spoke with the quiet authority of a woman who had survived everything life could throw at her. "I will travel to St. Louis to testify against Patterson," she announced. "Justice demands that his victims receive compensation and that his network be completely dismantled. But I will return here, to this valley, to the community that accepted me when I had nothing, and the man who never stopped loving me." Commissioner Williams leaned forward in his chair. "Miss Morningstar, I must emphasize what you're declining. Your father is offering to name you as his successor, to prepare you, to lead the Lakota Nation through the challenges ahead. This is an unprecedented opportunity." Morningstar's smile held depths of wisdom that impressed even the seasoned government official. "Commissioner, I've learned that true leadership isn't about titles or positions of authority. It's about building bridges between different peoples, creating understanding where once there was only conflict. I can serve my people better as an educator and translator than as a chief." Black Elk, who had been silent since the formal discussions began, finally spoke. "My niece, your father will be disappointed. He has dreamed of your return for 7 years. Uncle," Morningstar said gently, "tell my father that his daughter died in that burial cave, just as he intended. But tell him also that someone new was born from her suffering, someone who understands that love is stronger than tribal loyalty, that family is created by choice as much as by blood. I honor my heritage, but I choose my own destiny." Stone Walker felt his heart swell with pride and love as he watched her navigate these complex negotiations with grace and intelligence. She was offering to help both her original people and the government, while maintaining her independence and their life together. The agreement they reached was unprecedented in frontier history. Morningstar would serve as an official cultural liaison, helping the government understand native perspectives while assisting various tribes in negotiating with federal authorities. She would travel when needed, but return always to Valle de los Perdidos, where her growing family and chosen community waited. One more thing, Morningstar added, as the formal documents were being prepared. Any compensation I receive will be donated to establishing schools in native communities throughout the territory. Education is the bridge between worlds, and children deserve the chance to walk in multiple societies with confidence. 6 months later, as spring painted the desert with wildflowers and new life, Morningstar gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl whose mixed heritage would represent the future she envisioned. The entire valley celebrated their arrival, with families from a dozen different cultures bringing gifts and blessings for the children who would grow up knowing no boundaries between peoples. Stone Walker held his son while Morningstar cradled their daughter, both parents marveling at the miracle they had created together. The boy had his father's dark eyes and strong features, while the girl possessed her mother's unusual blue eyes and delicate bone structure. "What shall we name them?" Stone Walker asked, stroking his son's tiny hand. Morningstar looked around. Their adobe home, decorated now with gifts from their extended family in the valley, Apache blessing bowls, Mexican silver crosses, carved wooden toys from the children in her school, blankets woven by the community's grandmothers. These children would grow up surrounded by love that transcended cultural boundaries. "The boy will be called Bridgewalker," she decided, "because he will help people cross the spaces between different worlds, and the girl will be Starflower, because she will bloom beautifully in whatever soil she chooses to plant herself." Iron Butterfly, who had become like a sister to Morningstar over the years, entered the room carrying a cradle that the valley's craftsmen had made as a community gift. "The children of Valle de los Perdidos have their first generation," she said with deep satisfaction, "born free, loved by all, belonging everywhere and nowhere." As the twins grew, they became living symbols of the valley's ideals. Bridgewalker learned to speak Comanche from his father, Lakota from visiting tribal delegations, Spanish from the Mexican families, and English from the former cavalry officers who had found peace in the valley. Starflower absorbed her mother's gift for languages while also showing an early aptitude for the healing arts. The children played with friends whose heritage spanned continents and cultures, learning that differences were treasures to be celebrated rather than barriers to be overcome. They knew their parents' story, the love that had survived separation, slavery, and the prejudices of the outside world, and they carried that knowledge as a source of strength and hope. 10 years after that desperate day at Fort Bridger, when Stone Walker had bid for a woman with a sack over her head, he and Morningstar stood together, watching their children play with the others in the valley's central plaza. Bridgewalker was teaching a group of younger children to weave grass into rope, while Starflower led a storytelling circle where ancient legends from multiple tribes blended into new tales of wonder. "Do you ever regret it?" Stone Walker asked, his arm around Morningstar's waist as they observed their peaceful kingdom. "Choosing this life over the position your father offered you?" Morningstar leaned into his embrace, her hair now streaked with silver, but her blue eyes still holding the fire that had first captured his heart. "Never. We built something here that couldn't exist anywhere else, a love that bridges all divides, a family that belongs to no single tradition but celebrates them all, children who will never have to choose between their heritage and their hearts." She turned to face him fully, her hands reaching up to frame his weathered face. "Stone Walker, that day at Fort Bridger when you dropped to your knees in the dust, you didn't just recognize the woman you once loved. You recognized the possibility of what we could become together. And look what we've built from that moment of recognition." Their kiss was tender and deep, witnessed by their children and blessed by a community that had flourished around the love story that had brought them all together. In the distance, the bells of the valley's chapel, built to honor all faiths and none, rang out across the desert, calling families home for the evening meal. Stone Walker and Morning Star had begun, their journey as star-crossed lovers from warring tribes. They had survived separation, slavery, and the long hunt for freedom, but they had ended as something greater, the heart of a community where love truly conquered all, where children grew up knowing that family is created by choice and that home is wherever acceptance and understanding flourish. In Valle de los Perdidos, the Valley of the Lost, two souls had found each other and created a sanctuary where love knew no boundaries. Their story would be told for generations, inspiring others to believe that some loves are indeed stronger than any force that seeks to destroy them. The woman who had been sold with a sack on her head had become the architect of a new world, and the warrior